Chivalry 2. As the closed beta comes to an end, it's time to look over the last weekend and what we have discovered. Now, I have been playing the game since early April, so I've played a little bit more than most people that have just managed to get into the closed beta. However, it seems like the response has been very positive. If you pre-ordered the game, you are able to get into this closed beta this weekend, but unfortunately by the time you're watching this, the closed beta will have finished. However, if you do want to go and check out my link for Games Planet, which is a fantastic website, they are working closely with Chivalry 2 to get you an amazing discount with the code Chivalry. This means you can get straight into the game as soon as it releases. Without further ado, today I'm going to be talking about the combat specifically. I've spent some time looking over it and trying to get a feel of how it works, how it's different to other games, how it compares, and whether it's actually really that good at all. What it does for the game and how it makes the overall experience feel compared to something like the original Chivalry or Mordhau. So let's get straight into the video on my honest opinions of the combat in Chivalry 2. I would say as an overall line, Chivalry 2's combat in terms of its actual sword fighting is similar to the original in some ways, but there are some things that they have changed and added in that make it completely different in others. As I mentioned before, this game is very casual. If you're going into this expecting a really high skill-based game, that you're going to be doing some amazing duels throughout the battle and you're going to be feeling really cool doing these amazing ducks and spins and getting some cool feints and parries, this is not the game for you. Most of the time, it really boils down to slashing as hard as you can in a massive mosh pit of enemies, and that is great in some ways, but unfortunately I feel like it does detriment the game somewhat in the later periods of you actually playing it. You see, in my first impressions videos, I couldn't praise this enough, talking about how they'd gone the casual way and how it was so much fun, and I completely agree. In the game testing that I did, I couldn't have had more fun. It's probably the most fun I've had in any of these press events that I've done in the past. They've managed to make this casual style by having things like holding blocks or different types of heavy or light attacks, being able to pick up any object on the ground and throw at the enemy, or any weapon that you spawn in with, making it into projectile if you want to, even throwing shields and hammers and things like that when you get into the fray. And it's great for a short burst of fun. However, as time goes on, as I've racked up 8, 9, 10 hours in the game, I've discovered something else. With this casual gameplay, as time goes on, it sort of works to its disadvantage, almost infuriating at times that you're really struggling to get any decent and well-meaning duels within the game. One of my favorite parts of Mordhau was being able to show off your skill, being able to go up to someone and have a really nice battle using flourishes and parries in order to make almost a dance of sword warfare. Chivalry 2 is not like that. If Mordhau was a ballet, Chivalry 2 would be two crackheads in the back alley trying to punch each other in the face. And that's not a bad thing, I'm all for that. But it does make me worry about the long term and the longevity of the game, how the developers can keep people coming back when they have such casual combat. But despite that overview, let's talk about the in-depth details about what it brings. Of course, it has your generic slashing from all angles, being able to build up combos with side slashes, overhead attacks, and of course stabs. These can all be comboed together or just used in conjunction. Once again, like other games like Chivalry and Mordhau, dragging and interrupting attacks are within the game. These are much harder, and it also calls for some real world changes in your gameplay. Definitely having a bigger mouse mat is going to give you the advantage within this game. Being able to attack and then quickly drag your mouse from one side of the mouse mat to the other will speed up that slash, and of course you can do the opposite by dragging it, throwing off the enemy's guard. But as I'll get onto a little bit later, with the holding attacks within the game, it kind of makes this a little bit useless in some respects. Along with its default function, each attack also has its own heavy version. These will be much slower, but they will deal way more damage. They're often hard to pull off, and in the heat of battle, you don't really think about doing a heavy attack. You try and get in as many smaller attacks as possible in order to stop the enemy, but they are useful if you remember to use them. These are done by doing the same slashes as you would normally do with a default attack, but holding the mouse button rather than just tapping it. Q lets you do a special attack. This might be a sprint attack towards the enemy, shoulder barging someone as they walk out in front of you, or maybe a heavy overhead swing. This tends to be used at the start of an engagement, since these special attacks take a while to wind up, because of course they're much heavier and they deal more damage, meaning that you're probably not going to be using them much mid-duel, as the enemy will be able to get in stabs before you're able to bring down that heavy swing using the special attack button. Another good feature is kicking, something that is making a return, used for breaking shield blocks or stunning the enemy. However, I have found that you can jab with the R key, and that perhaps makes kicking a little bit redundant. It's faster, and you don't make yourself nearly as vulnerable since you keep your weapon up, meaning you can go into a block straight afterwards even if you miss the jab, and it essentially does the same thing. It doesn't move someone's back quite as far as a kicking motion would do. For example, you can kick someone off a wall, but you can't necessarily jab them off the wall, but it does stun them, meaning that they will lower their guard and you're able to follow up with a big attack. Not for quite as long, but if you're in the heat of battle, having these fast fast duels and forays with the opponent. Jabbing, I've found, is often the better way to go. Once again, you're able to jump over or duck under swings, and this is one of my favorite features in games like this because my does it make you feel like a badass, trying to find out where the enemy's going to swing next, gauging their movements and the way they're going to move their weaponry, and being able to duck under it and getting an attack on your own. It's often the most satisfying and cool looking ways of defeating an opponent. In conjunction with this, you're able to strafe from side to side using the movement keys and the spacebar. However, I really hate this key binding. If you can change it, just do it, because having the spacebar as the strafing key is so hard to use in mid-battle. You have to be pressing the direction button before you hit spacebar, but you have to hit spacebar about a second after you hit the directional button in order to actually perform a strafe. If you fail to do this, which you mostly will be during an actual duel since you're so heated and not really focusing on what buttons you're pressing, you're most likely just going to end up jumping and you will get yourself killed. I do really like strafing though. Being able to go back from the battle line to get yourself into a bit more safety is really useful at the cost of some stamina. Feinting is also within the game, but it's really weirdly implemented because when you attack, you have to click the V key to cancel that attack, and then you can feint with another one. But the window to cancel the attack is so small, so once again in the heat of battle, it isn't all that viable. So I found using the right click to block and then go into another attack is often better to feint with, since it uses very little stamina. And this is where the issue lies. Chivalry 2 has added in block holding, meaning that you can hold down the right button in order to keep your block up for the amount of stamina you have. And I think this is where the main issues lie, at least for me, with the combat. Holding blocks hasn't really been a big feature in these type of games, and it's for a good reason, because it takes away the complete skill of being able to block and time an enemy's attack. It also makes feinting really pointless. People can now hold a block, so it takes away every single point of the difficulty in block timing. In addition, the fact that holding a block slowly drains stamina means that just clicking the block like you would normally do in Mordhau, it drains very little stamina. So blocking is often a better way of feinting than pressing V to cancel attacks, since the stamina penalty is so low, meaning the V key is kind of useless. And whilst the holding block makes this game really casual, and I think that works to its advantage in most places, in terms of actual combat and having fun in the combat, it completely changes the way the game is played. And I understand the Chivalry 2 and Torn Banner didn't want to do something the same they've done before. They wanted to be different, stand out, but I don't think this was the way to do it. The issue is, so many of the attacks you can do within Chivalry 2 seem to cancel each other out. I mean, why would I kick when I can jab someone? Or, if you prefer kicking, why would you jab when you can just kick them? These two essentially do the same thing, so if you prefer one or the other, it makes the other key useless. Why would I cancel an attack with V when I can just block to feint instead? Or why would I use the special attack on Q when I can just hold my left mouse button to do a heavy attack? They essentially do the same thing. And I think what Chivalry 2 have created is a great overall experience when it comes to a fun game. Picking up any object on the battlefield, even jumping onto catapults and getting flung over the map. But there are too many different options when it comes to actual melee combat. I was so surprised when I went in the tutorial and you saw all these options when it came to slashing, heavy attacks, stabbing, combos, doing special attacks or feinting, kicking or jabbing. It was almost overwhelming. And even once I got the hang of it, most of the time I didn't use these attacks. And I think it's fine, having a surplus amount of options for different attacks you can do. But my problem lies is where many of them seem to be doing the same thing, almost making some of them useless. And I perhaps think this is something that Chivalry 2 devs should take a look at. Overall though, I think the combat is done very well. I was a little bit worried on gameplay in the trailers that we saw, since it does look a little bit janky when I was looking at it on YouTube, but actually playing it, it does feel very smooth. But once again, like I said, don't expect some mastery of sword fighting with this game. I've seen so many people having a go at other YouTubers for saying they're not that great at the game, but the problem is, it's really hard to be good at this game, because you'll be going into battles and just swinging wildly because that's what everyone else is doing. If you try and do any sort of skill, parrying, feinting, dodging, you can do it to some extent, but at the end of the day, you will get swarmed and overwhelmed by the other team, meaning that it's just not really viable. The best way to do it is to attack, move backwards, attack, and move backwards. Getting into really cool and in-depth duels is not something you're going to be doing much in Chivalry 2. In conclusion, my overall opinion is, whilst it has some issues and there are some things like the holding blocks that I don't necessarily agree with that actually help the game, but it is definitely a different style. It has expanded upon its predecessor in terms of the combat, and whether that's good for you or not, that's just a matter of taste. For me, I think the overall experience is fantastic, and the combat complements the casual style well. But whether that will make it hold up in the long run, I guess only time will tell. But let me know your opinions down below. Have you played the game, and what do you think of the combat? Once again, if you are thinking of getting the game, click the link in the description to help support me on Games Planet. I get a tiny cut of it. It's minuscule cut, but it all adds up and it really helps the channel. But subscribe if you haven't already, and until then, I will see you in the next one.